What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Rascal Reacts, where you ask for my 2 cents and I give you a nickel. Had to think about which channel it was on. This is a companion channel for the Homie Hangout. So very similar type of content on both. Today is kind of a reaction, kind of not. I'll get into that, but hopefully you guys are subscribed and the bell notification and, all the other good stuff that everybody else with a YouTube channel wants you to do to show support. So this comes from me seeing Hector Bravo's Patreon account, right? He has a channel, That Prison Guard. He has another channel, Unhinged, I think it is, where he interviews people. And he had posted on his Patreon, what questions would you ask Rene Boxer Enriquez if you had a chance? And I was sitting here one morning drinking my coffee and I was like, oh, got answers to this, right? Ask and you shall receive. So I rattled off like 10 questions, and of course, he didn't ask those questions, and I didn't expect him to, but it sort of got me thinking. And I wound up seeing the full interview. I don't know if it's all out on YouTube yet or not. I think he's releasing it in segments, but for those on Patreon, you can see it, all at once. I will say I've seen a lot of the stuff that Renee has put out there on various channels and on the Mob Spotter's own channel. This was kind of a different conversation, not in substance. He talked about individuals he was with and different things, but he seemed, I don't know, more relaxed or something, but it was just a different vibe. I don't know if there was some type of, particular camaraderie between those two, or maybe he's just getting used to being on camera, and being home. I don't know. But it was interesting. It was. And so I figured I would read you guys those 10 questions that I had and talk a little bit about some of them. For those that don't know, for some reason, who Rene Boxer Enriquez is. He was a Mexican mafia member for a long time. He wound up dropping out and debriefing and then went on to cooperate with law enforcement in the prosecution of other gang members. I don't know if only MM members or Southsiders, or I don't know, that maybe that should have been question 11. But yes, one of the most high profile, if not the most high profile, defector from that side of things. And my personal opinions of him, I don't know him personally, so I don't really have strong personal opinions. I tend not to view people that cooperate with law enforcement in prosecuting other people very favorably. Like, that's just me. Not that I've never spoken to him. This YouTube thing makes kind of a small world, right? And I know folks will point to John from Paradigm, right? And how the NF member who, was kind of the equivalent in a sense, right? He became a very useful resource for law enforcement and prosecuting people for many, many years. Just like Renee did. Although I think they're pretty different people in a lot of ways. But anyways, so there's that, right? And that's a bit of a stumbling block for me that I don't think will ever go away. But to each their own, and folks make their own choices, and they got to lie in their own beds and look in their own mirrors. So let's get into these questions, and then you guys let me know what you think. I'm just going to read them off of the Patreon. That's the easiest way to do it, but I'm not going to show it on the screen because there's other people commenting, and I don't know that they want their stuff up there. So I'm going to start with the first one that I asked, but it really was just kind of what came to my mind when I was typing. This was a week ago. It took me like an hour, so I was like, let me turn this into some content, at least make it useful, right? And some of this stuff he did kind of address inadvertently in his conversation, so I'll talk about that too. But let's go. Question number 1. What's your response to those who say you traded the acceptance and community of one group for the community and acceptance of another? Worded another way, you were a soldier for a prison gang, and now you're a soldier for law enforcement. I think these are good questions, right? And some of them are based on kind of my own experiences out of prison and professional work, and I'll get to that in a minute. But many have dropped out of prison gangs and debriefed, but few have become as prolific a law enforcement tool as yourself. Is that just doing what you needed to in order to have a chance at freedom? Or did you come to embrace the law enforcement mindset in punishing alleged gang members? Particularly curious about that. like I said, a lot of people drop out, a lot of people debrief or go to SNY yards or whatever the case may be. But they don't do everything this dude's done. But they also don't get out off of, I think it was multiple life sentences that Renee had. But, you can do all that. You're still going to spend the rest of your life in prison. You just, at the time, you would not be in the SU program anymore. So yeah, I'm curious, right? Question number 3. High-level gang investigators are trained in how to quote-unquote break affiliates, often by taking all that they learn in studying and monitoring an individual, gathering intel from other defectors, and then finding a window through which to build a rapport or position themselves as a sympathetic resource, etc. Did you experience those efforts? And if so, was it effective, or was it survival, or some other self-motivation, knowing that you were being expelled from the MA? And he kind of talked about this, right? So it's common knowledge that Renee heard the footsteps. He was in the hat, which apparently he had been in the hat multiple times with the MA, but really felt like this was going to be his last go around. And that can be, I'm sure, a hell of a motivator for people, right? Like, damn, why am I going to sit back here when my own people are going to be after me? Then what's the use of staying solid or whatever? I have heard he addressed it a little bit in his conversation with Hector Bravo, where he said, I have been toying with the idea of letting it go and of dropping out and debriefing, and then couldn't quite bring himself to do it. But he went to a visit, made some statements during a visit. IGI was listening, of course, because he was a Mexican Mafia member, so they're going to listen to everything. And then they went ahead and pulled him out of his cell on some little made-up medical mission and wound up pulling him off to the side. And the way he put it, they were in there packing his shit already when they snatched him up. They knew that he was going to be done for. So I'm curious though, right? So I guess he answered it a little bit, in that it's not as if they came to him and convinced him. They saw an opportunity where his commitment was weak and sought to exploit that. But then I'm curious about the work afterwards, aligning with law enforcement to that degree afterwards. Was that from building a rapport with them or what? Anyways, the next question. Have you felt similarly in the way rank and file gang members would respond when, as a Mexican Mafia member, you entered a room or walked on a tier, and the way rank and file gang investigators respond upon seeing you for the first time at a conference? And what I mean by that is being a member of a prison gang, of one of these organizations, that comes with status, right? And you oftentimes, especially these days, right? People know, but even back then, folks know if you're one of those guys. And just being one of those guys, independent of anything else that may be true or not true about you, being one of those guys commands a level of, damn, that's one of them, right? From the foot soldiers, And from the way I've heard it explained, that's kind of how gang investigators and cops feel when he comes into the room and they first see him. Like, damn, that's big badass, MA member. Like, that's the dude that knows everything about these gangs. And so I'm just curious for him if he feels the similarity. Because the sound, when I've heard from folks who have been where he's, done speaking engagements or conferences or whatever, they say that's what it looks like, right? That when he walks in the room, you would think that he was still one of those guys. Next question. It takes a level of arrogance, among whatever else, to become a Mexican Mafia member, much like it takes a level of arrogance to run for office. You went from one of the few elite in a California prison gang to the elite among prosecution witnesses against that gang. Do you think these are just different manifestations of a lifelong desire to be great? And if so, where does that come from? Or, as you mentioned fear on another podcast, are they different manifestations of a lifelong quest for security? Either way, do you feel at this point in your life that you have reached the pinnacle and it's just maintenance from here on? Or is there still a drive for more? And if so, What does that look like? You to even consider being one of the guys, right? One of the fellas, you got to be cocky. You know, you have to believe that you are the material. You have to believe that you have what it takes to be one of the few. And he, he took that step. He became that. Now he's elite in terms of prosecution witnesses, So is that just a desire of always wanting to be the best at whatever you do? I'm going to be the best prison gang member. I'm going to be the best rat. I'm going to be the best, witness. I'm going to be the best everything. But also there's another angle of sometimes it's fear, right? It's if you can be the scariest and the biggest and the baddest and you're in the peer group with the toughest guys, there's a level of protection there, and there's a level of security that comes with being in that group and being viewed as elite, right? Folks oftentimes don't want to press an elite person. They don't want to get on the bad side of an elite person, whether it's an elite businessman or elite gangster or elite whatever. So that's kind of where that question comes from, right? Like, is there a similarity in his rise through the ranks? And if he's not done, what does the next thing look like? This was kind of a natural transfer over, right? Transfer of skill sets, transfer of everything. What could be great next? I mean, is it at a podcaster or at this YouTube stuff or what? Next question. Many gang experts for the government assert that anyone who claims to be from a southern street gang is a henchman for the Mexican mafia. Others would say that while the MA would love for that to be the case, it is impractical to hold that as a universal truth, and there are a number of other factors at play. Where do you come down on that subject? And if you allow for case-by-case analysis, do you think you've been successful at helping these other experts at understanding and evaluating the nuance, or is that outside the scope of your responsibilities in a criminal case? So what this comes down to is I have a long history of being a gang expert, also in the court system, but I have only ever worked for defense attorneys, right? I've never worked for the prosecution, not particularly interested in that. So I hear these gang experts, which most of the time are cops. Sometimes they're academics. Sometimes it's CDC, officers. I've never gone head to head with Renee in a case, right? Just like I never went head to head with John in a case. But I've heard how they talk. I've seen these reports that they write. And it really is like, you see him in his picture throwing up a 13. You see he's got some blue Cortezes. That's pledging allegiance. That 13 is pledging allegiance to the Mexican mafia. And you're like, boy, he's a fucking 16-year-old kid in, some small town somewhere. That dude wouldn't know it made man if they slapped him in the face, right? So to say that his actions are a direct result of his allegiance to this thing that he doesn't know and doesn't understand, I don't think that's true most of the time. I think I grew up in the hood and the people outside outside on the streets, this is what they claim. This is how they dress. These are the jerseys they wore, and these are the people that they beef with. These are my neighbors. They say they're the ops. Those are the ops. It's not any more complicated than that, right? For most young gang members. Now you get a little bit older, you go back and forth to prison, you hit some of these higher level yards, you catch some shoe terms, and sure, things change a little bit, right? And some neighborhoods have long entrenched histories with made men. And this is not only true for Southerners and the MA. That's what I'm talking about because there are questions for him. But I've dealt with this in Northern cases and NF stuff, just the same. And I think that in his right mind, Renee would know that no, not every dude running on the street does this. But I'm curious if he then teaches these other experts how to look at a case-by-case basis with nuance, or if it's kind of like you have your style of doing things and I have my style. Essentially, like, are you hook, line, and sinker with their little bullshit narrative, right? Or do you take it, case by case? And if so, do you help them with how to take it case by case. And I'd be curious as to how you do that, right? How you help law enforcement or other people that don't have a personal connection to the lifestyle. And you don't got to be a gangster to understand gangs, but to come in as an expert and stuff is different. And so I view him as, I'll just be honest, not to toot my own horn, but in terms of gang expert stuff for defense attorneys, I'm one of those elite, right? I would say, compared to the other folks doing it. You know, I'm in that elite category, and I've had some success in courtrooms, and I don't get up there and bullshit or lie or anything else. You know, my credibility is intact. I just call it how I see it. And like I said, I think he's elite on the prosecution side. And so that interests me, you know, it interests me. Next question. YouTube has the potential to be a lucrative passive income for someone such as yourself. How do you feel seeing other channels beating you to the punch, so to speak, with content directly related to you or things you've worked on? And what I mean by that is some of the old videos. Like, I'm curious, now that he's in the field and now that he's out here and he's doing social media and stuff, these videos of Mexican Mafia member describes, you know, how it's a criminal organization. Those videos have a gazillion views, right? And I don't know the history of those channels or they're monetized or what they got for it, but theoretically, folks have made a bag showing these excerpts and clips of Renee talking while he was still incarcerated, before he was doing all this law enforcement work and everything else, and certainly much before he was out of prison and now doing YouTube. So I'm curious if he looks at that sometimes like, man, that's me. Like, you're getting a bag off of my content. I wish I had that stuff to show or any, you know, anyways. I guess some of these questions kind of speak for themselves, but I'm expanding on them a little bit of what my thought process is. Next question. Do you think cooperating with law enforcement on cases unrelated to your own criminal activity to help investigate and convict other people should be a more widely available or publicized means for convicted killers to parole off of a life sentence? Because let's keep it real. Is he getting all those law enforcement recommendations for parole and he's rehabilitated and everything else if he doesn't work for them? Probably not. Highly unlikely, you know? But it's not as if it was just his cases. You know, it's one thing folks tell on cases they're involved in, you know? But this is, from my understanding, touring around to talk about cases that you ain't had a damn thing to do with none of that and don't know anybody involved. You're just analyzing the case. Much like I do on the defense side. I defend folks from gangs I don't know about, hoods I don't know about, crimes I don't know about. You know, I don't have any personal connection to it, but I'm just analyzing it on the surface. Does he think that this should become more of a thing, right? That law enforcement and the feds and whoever should go through these prisons and hit somebody's yards and be like, hey, if you're willing to take the stand for us over X amount of years, you can go home. I think that's a dangerous prospect. I'm not saying I'm in favor of it, but curious his thoughts. Next question. If law enforcement investigate and prosecute murders, in part to secure justice for the family, but then a convicted person can later earn the support of law enforcement in not having to fulfill that life sentence, is that not an injustice of sorts? Because even in the case of assisting in a homicide trial, your role is not so much related to guilt or innocence, but rather the circumstances around the crime and additional time. So you're not solving murders to beat your sentence for murder as much as you're helping people be incarcerated longer in the hopes that you will be incarcerated less. Break that down a little bit. I know in my work as a gang expert for defense attorneys at the state level, federal level, immigration court, right? You know, you got people. I had a case out of San Francisco, 22nd and Bryant, right? Northerners shooting Army Street. He was on camera with the gun, right? There was no debate. That was him. That was a gun. He fired it at somebody that didn't want him to fire it at. Like, that was not what I was there for, right? I was there for the what's going on around it. Was this gang related? Was it not gang related? Was he reasonably in fear? Like, and in my experience, at least in my role, it's really never like I don't investigate the crime. I don't investigate if you did it. I investigate the circumstances around it, right? And I'm assuming that Renee's role is very similar. So he's not solving murders, right? The cops are solving the murder. He's coming in to talk about why the murder, who ordered the murder. Was a murder for the benefit of a gang? Because in the past in California, now that radically changes your sentence. Is this all part of a conspiracy? Cool, that's a Fed case. Run it up, And so it's not body for body, right? It's not, man, I took some lives and now I'm going to go, bring to justice other people that took lives. It's, man, I'm doing a whole lot of time. And if I can, help law enforcement get these people a whole lot of time, then maybe I'll do less time. So this whole concept of justice and law enforcement, I don't know, it's tricky to me. So curious his thoughts on it. Last question, we'll wrap this up. Did you make more money in your 20 plus years as a Mexican Mafia associate and member, or in your 20 plus years as a law enforcement consultant? And he kind of answered that. And he's talked about before how in the early days of his affiliation with the MA, folks wasn't really getting paid like that, right? That wasn't the priority. It wasn't that sophisticated of a criminal organization. It was a brutal prison gang. And he observed and participated in that transition, right? So he talks about making money on the streets when he was in the Hector Bravo conversation. One of the most interesting things was he was like, hey, I didn't run yards. I didn't do all that. I ran crews on the street, but I don't want to run no yards because the politics is too messy. You can't win. Folks get whacked and all this other stuff. So that was a really interesting part of the conversation, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't pretend to know the specifics of what he got paid in either lifestyle. I know that being an expert for defense attorneys, where the budget is much less than the budget for prosecutors, can be very lucrative. You can make a lot of money at it. I started off making $50 an hour and had never worked on a case and didn't have my college degree yet, nothing else. At some point I'm making $150, sometimes $200 an hour for some of these federal death penalty cases, which I never testified in a federal case, but I worked on some capital cases just in trying to get death penalty off the table. But so that's for me, right? I don't have the resume that this dude has, and so I know that now I'm pretty damn sure. Now has the ability to command a very pretty penny for working on these cases, especially because he has all these years of experience. Once you go testify a couple of times, now you get to up your rate a little bit. Once you help somebody on a case, in my case, it was helping people get them home or helping people, get a murder dropped down to a lesser charge or that kind of stuff. That's what success looked like for me. And once those happened a few times, then they're willing to pay you. But the budget for public defenders, it very, very rarely did I work for a paid attorney. The budget for public defenders on state cases in California is not that great. It's not that great. So the DA, on the other hand, like that's law enforcement. They have a nearly unlimited budget, right? At least that's the appearance. That's how I see it. Maybe he would correct me. Maybe, there's stuff I'm sure that I don't know about on that end. But I get the sense, I don't know if he got paid when he was doing all this stuff when he was in prison. Like, was being able to travel around and get some street food the compensation enough? And they just kind of used what would be a very, expensive tool, but they didn't have to pay so much? Or is that offset by the investing in the security concerns of going places, or was it done remotely? I don't know. I don't know how that stuff played out. That's why I'm asking the fucking question. But it also sounds like he did not make a lot of money as a MA member either, at least for a chunk of his time as an MM member. So I'm curious, right? I think it's interesting. Anyways, there you have it. It's been like a 25-minute video. Just some of the questions, man, that I would have asked him. Who knows? Maybe he sees this video someday and decides to answer some of the questions. I don't know. It comes from my experience and my mindset. So there you have it, man. Let's say Rascal Reacts. You ask for my 2 cents, I will give you a nickel every time, at minimum. Stay tuned to the homie hangout. I got more content, dropping over there as well. And then, yeah, happy Valentine's Day to all the lovebirds out there and everybody flying solo, man. You guys take care of yourself.